Happy Sunday, America. It's Sunday, April 28th, 2024, and you're listening to the DMZ America podcast with me, Ted Rall, coming to you from the left.
And I'm editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right. Just before we started recording this, we were having a conversation that I think would make Sarah McLachlan cry.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because
Isn't that pretty much any conversation?
It is. Well, it's about pets and it was about animals. And Ted said, fuck rescue animals.
You're outing me on the podcast and letting everyone know what a heartless fuck I am, and like
yes,
that I'm into.
No, I mean you made a good point.
What's the word? What's the thing? Not epigenetics. Like the Nazis. They were into that stuff about race theory.
Gosh, what was that called? I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm having a senior moment.
Yeah, it's all what can I say? All right, well, anyway, so the point is, so I've gotten now I have some explaining to do. So
no, just let it lie there, Ted. Just leave it alone.
Okay, no, I'm not doing that. No.
Okay, explain.
All right, so here's what I'm saying. So I know that we're going to lose like 20% of our listeners from this, but here's my thing. I don't understand why people get rescue dogs or cats when there are so many like non-abused cats and dogs that are in great physical and psychological health that are being euthanized every single day by pet shelters all around the country. And I guess the thing is, if there were a shortage of like there was during the pandemic, let's just call them, I don't know, high quality cats and dogs, then like I would totally understand, like, okay, I'll get like a pit bull that was trained to kill like 60-year-old white cartoonists. But like I'm kind of like, maybe I don't want that like right now because I have other options. So I'm like, you literally can go onto like Pet Finder and other sites and find anything you want. You might have to go somewhere to get it, but like if you're not fussy, if you just want like say a dog, you'll be able to find a dog like probably within walking distance of your home. And if you want like a purebred, like I really want a collie, it has to be a purebred collie, you'll probably be within 100 miles be able to find a purebred beautiful animal that's never had the shit kicked out of it, that had been set on fire, treated like shit, yelled at for no reason, fed properly, has all of its shots, always been taken care of. Why would you not get that instead of like a rescue animal? And I'm not doing and by the way, I want to just sort of also editorialize that I hate it when people say, oh, I have a rescue animal. And what they mean is they went to the shelter and they got a cat. That's not a rescue animal. A rescue animal is an animal that was abused and treated like shit, that had my childhood. And then like basically, and then like, so, like, there's a better alternative to me. People should adopt a better alternative to me. I should be probably put down. So, I mean, I'm being consistent here.
Like the cur that you are.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ted, there was, it was an interesting conversation. And anyway, so Sarah McLachlan, if you're listening, we are saying go to your local pound and adopt a dog before it's euthanized.
Yes, please. I mean, and also like I don't understand the whole, and also don't get any animal that can take you in a fair fight. Like that's not a pet. That's going to be the source of your death. That's a suicide pact. That's like, I mean, I know someone who has a 120-pound dog. The dog is, friendly and nice. It knocked me. It just tried to say hi to me and knocked me over and nearly killed me. But because it's 120 pounds. And and it's like the point is, I just don't think a 120-pound dog is really a pet. I mean, it's a beautiful animal. It's just not a pet.
Yeah, my sister-in-law, who's very tiny, likes mastiffs, which I think she had one that was 190 pounds. So, I mean, it pretty much, came close to outweighing me. And you know how you like to wrestle with dogs? I tried wrestling with this, and it literally with his paw just went and hit me in the head. And I'm like,
Yep. Bye. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I have a lot of opinions about animals.
He
But
does.
and other things. All right. So anyway, let's move on here. Okay. So obviously, the one of the big stories this week is is somehow after 6 months of Israel pounding the shit out of Gaza, the last 2 weeks have been the 2 weeks where somehow America's college and university students decided that this was a serious problem that they weren't into. It all started just very close to where I live at Columbia University in New York, also my alma mater. And it started with an Occupy Wall Street type encampment that has now been basically replicated by schools around the country, USC, Cal State, Humboldt, which actually closed entirely for the rest of the semester. USC, which canceled its commencement ceremony entirely after first
That was
canceling their
bullshit.
valedictorian from delivering their commencement speech. Yes, it was. Anyway, so where did I say? Did I say Princeton, Ohio State? Anyway, the point is all over the country. And now there's considerable pressure coming from both the left and the right against college presidents who have called in the police to arrest the students. People on the right say they haven't been going far enough. They've been coddling these kids, these insolent little fucking brats who should get back to class and study for finals and quit fucking around and quit disrupting school. And also there may be a bunch of anti-Semites, although there's still zero evidence of that, but okay, whatever. And then on the left, there's people like me who are saying that this is basically these college presidents are indeed solving a non-existent problem, engaged in fascism, suppressing free speech against peaceful protesters who are not in any way, shape, or form disrupting life on campus. It's just this morning, I saw a piece in the New York Times by John McWhirter, who's kind of a conservative on the editorial page, and he was talking about Columbia, and he said, like, these students have taken over space at Columbia that makes it impossible for anyone else to use it. Okay, so John, I went to Columbia. Okay, that's a little lawn. It's one lawn. No one ever uses that space. It's a lawn that's surrounded by a fence. Literally, it's a lawn. The only people who were ever using that lawn was the grass. Okay, like
no,
no one ever
Ted.
sat on that lawn before.
I have to jump in there and say it was a vital and important space for people to play frisbee.
Oh, that's true. There was some frisbee playing. That's true.
Okay.
And, although the other lawn remains available and empty, I might say, for frisbeers, including ultimate frisbee practitioners, which is a big thing at Columbia, should they feel so moved. Not to mention also Columbia is 2 blocks from 2 different parks, public parks.
They have parks
Park,
in New York?
Morningside Park and Riverside Park. Yes, we do. We have beautiful parks in New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is there one centrally located?
There is, but that one's a little far for Columbia students. Although you can go, it's totally walkable.
Actually, that wasn't that far. I walk there from your place.
It's not that far at all. Yeah, Columbia's a little further, but yeah. Anyway, the point is that's been going on. There is also there's news out of Gaza.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll say the ICC, the International Court, Criminal Court, is currently very seriously considering issuing an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This is specific not to the war generically, but to the charge of deliberate mass starvation of a population, because Israel has blockaded Gaza and prevented a significant amount of food or water aid from getting in. That's caused mass hunger, including the deaths of many infants and newborn babies. So the ICC is looking into that. Behind the scenes, the US is trying to use its influence to prevent that from happening. And also probably even more disturbing is the discovery of 2 mass graves in Gaza, with a total of about 400 bodies having been found, both at hospitals. The mass graves were excavated, and what's particularly, mass graves are not by themselves illegal or anything like that. Yeah, it means you have a lot of bodies in warfare, and you have to get them into the ground as quickly as possible because it can spread typhus and other diseases if they're not disposed of. and sometimes you just don't have time to do individual burials. But the problem here is that they dug up these bodies. They found that many of them had had their hands tied behind their backs. Many of them were still wearing hospital gowns and tags, admission tags around their wrists from the hospital. So they appear to be patients, and also doctors and nurses in their hospital gowns, all tied. It appeared to have been summarily executed and then dumped into a pit. There are reports from eyewitnesses who claim that the IDF massacred these people and buried many of them alive in pits. So, because there's not much sign of them having been shot, we don't know what happened here. And so, what's very disturbing is that the IDF and the US are militantly opposed to any kind of outside independent forensics investigation team from coming in and taking a look. And it's kind of like, if you didn't do anything wrong and your allies didn't do anything wrong, you should be okay with an independent outside investigation team.
Well, who's doing the excavating?
Well, so that is apparently the combination of the hospital workers who remain alive and they've also been joining with local civilians who have access to construction equipment. So it's been kind of an ad hoc affair. A lot of journalists are on site and they've been taking pictures, and so it's definitely, there is considerable reasonable cause for suspicion against the IDF having committed a war crime here.
That is a war crime of such magnitude. You forwarded the story to me this morning, and we're going to, this is one of those stories I sit and wait.
Well, that's correct.
Because
can't rush to judgment. It could be something, there could be an explanation.
There could be an explanation. It could be that actually the Hamas or the Palestinians in charge of the hospital did it themselves.
Well, the problem is that that's out because those hospitals were both completely occupied by the IDF during the time period involved.
Well, I'm saying that the graves may be older than the current.
Apparently, they're not. That's
but Ted, you're saying these are being excavated by an ad hoc group of people. I mean, kind of information and drawing that kind of conclusion. Here's why I sound sad, because this is definitely a war crime if the facts as we know them right now turn out to be true, and if it turns out that the IDF committed these crimes.
I mean, yeah, and Hamas had control of these hospitals for years. Why would they do that now? You know what I mean?
Who says it's now? I'm saying that this is being dug out by a group of people who may not know how old things are. I am saying let us wait and see.
Well, totally.
What the actual facts of the matter are. And
it looks bad for Israel, though, because you can tell from the state of decomposition of bodies.
Well, this smells like a story one of those stories that we get upset about, talk about on this podcast, and then 2 weeks later, where'd that story go? Oh, it wasn't true.
Right.
Oh, the facts were completely different. If the facts are as you're laying them out now, you asked me once early during the Gaza operation by Israel, what's my Rubicon? What's the line they would cross?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This would be by a lot the line. And if it turns out that the IDF or some other Israeli controlled operative committed this crime, I'm done with Israel. I think a lot of people like me would be done with Israel. That's why I'm being extremely cautious about this story and I'm going to follow it. And I'm going to be on it like a Rottweiler on a 4-year-old.
It is interesting, right? I mean, I think it's interesting to explore that psychology. You're not unusual at all in this respect. I mean, I think about an analogy of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, right? I mean, by some counts, the United States was responsible for killing as many as 2 to 3 million Vietnamese. How many people died at My Lai? Maybe 1,000, maybe fewer.
Oh, no. That was just a dozen. That was a handful of people.
Under 100.
Yeah.
And I got to say, parenthetically, it was stopped by the heroism of U.S. forces, actually. There was while this was going on, troops led by Lieutenant Calley, right?
Yeah.
He they two helicopter pilots were flying overhead on their way on some other mission. They observed what was happening. They did their loudspeaker, came circled low, and they ordered Cali and his men to stop. They ignored them, and then they said, "We will fire upon you unless you
Wow.
cease." And then they did fire at their own U.S. troops, and they were shaken. They were like, "We had to fire at our own troops,"
Sure.
and like, but that's how it came to an end.
But
But
they
it's
also had
interesting. It's
journalists.
like,
They also had a journalist come on the scene right afterwards,
right.
and the images.
Well, that's right, and that's what we're seeing here in Israel. I mean, I just think it's interesting because it's like, by all accounts, I mean, we can nitpick about, is it 34,000 like Gaza says? If so, what percentage of them are Hamas fighters? How many are civilians? Is that an exaggerated number? Is that an understated number? But the point is, many thousands of civilians have clearly been killed in Gaza. And so, like, the same thing in Vietnam, many thousands of hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese people had been killed by the My Lai massacre. But there's just something about these kinds of events, like that, like, for example, the massacre by the Nazis of US POWs in World War II in the Ardennes forest, right? A very famous incident that sort of, it's kind of memorialized at the end of The Great Escape, the Steve McQueen film. There's the massacre at Oradour-sur-Glane, 4 days after D-Day in 1944, where the SS troops surrounded a French village and killed everyone there, 642 people killed. And I'm always like, but like, when you think about like the Nazis, 642 is a drop in the bucket for them. It's like, and
that was a slow morning.
400 is a drop in the bucket for Israel and Gaza at this point. So it's like, sort of like, what really is the difference between dropping 2,000-pound bombs on an apartment building and going into a hospital, dragging people into and tying their hands behind their backs, kicking them into a pit, and driving a bulldozer over them? I mean, I'm not asking that to be facetious. I mean, I just think it is different. It feels different to me too. But I just wonder why it feels different.
Because I think since World War II, the world surrendered itself to the idea of citizen casualties. When the Russians were coming from the east, when we landed in Normandy, during the North Africa, and then especially when the landing in Sicily and the moving up of the Italian peninsula, that we, in that famous moment when there was a historic, was it a church? No, it wasn't a cathedral. It was on top of a hill. It was a monastery, and the Germans were holed up in it, and they were holding off bombing it because it was like 1,000-year-old monastery or something. Had very profound historic significance. And Eisenhower said, "You know what? We got to just say fuck it. We can't not fight places because they're to save for those kinds of reasons." My point is, they open it up to civilians being part of the cost of war, and it's been that way ever since. Look at Korea, look at Vietnam from the American standpoint. Look at France and
Algeria.
Algeria. No, I was right. Woohoo! I remembered something. It's the small victories, Ted. It's the fact that we now are okay with civilian casualties in a war situation. Obviously, the more recent ones with Iraq and Afghanistan, and now this. So I think that may be part of why people like myself are looking at this, going, "Okay, that was a war. That was part of the war execution." But this is and again, if this turns out to be by the IDF forces, the fact that Jewish forces from the state of Israel, created from the ashes of the Holocaust, committed this kind of crime, it makes it, that's what, in my mind at least, that's what makes it so much worse, if indeed this turns out to be what happened. Like I said, I'm going to take my time and wait for the story to play out and get more facts and get more boots on the ground.
Toward that end, what do you make of the fact that that Israel and the United States are so angry at the suggestion that there be an investigation.
That's one of those, that's one of those instances that is galling. I mean, you and I both agree on this, that transparency in all things, especially in particular, specifically as it applies to governments, is essential
Mhm.
and almost non-existent.
True, true. Well, I
I
mean,
have
it's like you can't, I mean, come on. It's like in this day and age, I mean, the Israel, here's the thing. There's going to be an investigation. They are going to go in there. And like,
well,
the
someone will, yeah.
someone will go in there. I mean, it's impossible. It's like you can't hide these things. I mean, to think about when we were kids and there was the so-called secret bombings of Cambodia. How laughable. You could never have a secret bombing of anything in the modern world, right? There's just no way. In the age of, there would be some Cambodian peasant who had an iPhone, who'd be like, look at these bombs falling on my rice paddies. And that's so I mean, there would be. And
Yeah,
so
no, you're
there's
right.
so that's completely just not feasible now. So I mean, basically, I don't get it. Like the Israelis, they really don't seem to understand how they're perceived. It's kind of like, look, you might as well, like, you're going to get the investigation anyway. You might as well be like, we welcome the investigation. We tell them to call us. We'll set them up so they can go in. Then they can have some input, some influence into the investigation. Maybe get like a team that they like a little better than the team that they would get otherwise. I mean, it's like it's to their advantage to say, of course, we cooperate completely. The IDF has nothing to hide. If we've done anything wrong, we'll fess up to it. That's what you're supposed to say. That's how you handle this sort of thing.
Right, but you of all people know about the haze of war, the fog of war. I think both the Israeli and American politicians go, well, you have 18, 19, 20-year olds in a very high stress situation. Maybe they fucking did it.
Well, it is entirely
That
possible.
to your point, that's why if I was Israeli or American, I would say, diplomat, I'd say, yeah, we'll handle this. Just everyone just back
But
off.
that's not going to work. You know,
I
not
sure
now,
will. Of
not in
course
the
it
current
will.
media environment. They're not going to be able to control this. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, you can. You can try. You can, and you
they're
can
going to
come
fail.
pretty damn. You can come pretty damn close. Now, the other part of the story is the potential arrest warrant for Netanyahu, who's apparently reached out to President Biden asking to please protect me, hide me, let me hide in your basement, away from this arrest warrant. Which seems to me the arrest warrant. I mean, I'd have to. I don't know. I'm speaking completely out of my ass here, Ted. But how many other arrest warrants have they issued,
Well,
given the amount?
there's one currently pending against Putin, who
Okay,
for
that's
allegedly kidnapping. This is very poorly sourced, but he's been accused of ordering Russian forces to kidnap Ukrainian babies into Russian territory. It's kind of
that.
like probably not true.
Yeah, that doesn't
What they're
sound.
specifically referring to is that when the war began, ethnic Russians living in eastern Ukraine in the Donbass region, in the Donetsk and Luhansk so-called People's Republics, many of them with their kids or without their kids to stay away from the war zone, sent their kids to live in Russia. I mean, millions of Ukrainians have fled to Russia to try to avoid either conscription into the Ukrainian army or just to get away from the fighting. And it's like, so that's it's related to that. It's foggy. But anyway, the point is Putin can only go to a friendly country, otherwise he faces arrest. As soon as he gets off the plane, there was Slobodan Milosevic, ended up in
Right.
The Hague on trial, died there in jail. The president, I think the president of Sudan also is subject
Yes.
to
Yeah.
a ICC arrest warrant. He can't go anywhere. So it's not toothless. And I mean,
No, I
Netanyahu
guess my point
would
is that
not
there are
be able to
so,
go anywhere.
given that genocide is not something, or, and war crimes is not something restricted to European powers, although you mentioned Sudan, the Sudanese president. I'm just curious, who else has been subject to this, these
I think
charges.
also, I think, what's his name? Pinochet, the former dictator of Chile, also. was subject to an ICC arrest warrant and was ultimately picked up.
Was he?
Yeah, I think he was put on trial, if memory serves, in Portugal or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he couldn't stay in Chile.
no,
Because
he couldn't do that.
people were
That
angry.
chili was a little too hot for him. Bum, ba-dum, bum. But like it wasn't chill. I could do this all day. So but like I think no, I think it's pretty serious. That'll be interesting. Also, there's a piece in today's New York Times by it's an interview with a guy named Yair Lapid. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And he's an Israeli opposition figure in the Knesset who was briefly prime minister for a hot second. And basically, he's being presented as like the anti-Netanyahu moderate opposition. And basically, the Times is teeing him up like he's awesome. We should go with him instead. And when you read it, I mean, he certainly sounds less unreasonable than Netanyahu, but Scott, he says things like, well, we want a two-state solution. And when they scratch a little bit at what that means, he means that, well, obviously, the Palestinians, we want all the Palestinians out of Israel. In other words, all the Palestinian Israelis who live in they call it Israeli Arabs, there's millions of them, right? Who live in Israel. We want to kick them out into like Gaza and the West Bank. And those countries, the new state of Palestine, which should be run by like Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, should be demilitarized and weak. That's his own words. So Israel must always be in control of that territory. Like we can come and go whenever we want. And I'm like, that's the moderate? That's the moderate in Israeli politics. I mean, the Israelis don't get any coverage at all of anything that happens within Gaza. They don't have their own reporters there or allied reporters who bring the news. They don't get any images from Gaza. The only news they get from Gaza is like 3 IDF soldiers murdered by Hamas terrorists, and they'll have pictures of their young faces. They're not they're really supportive of the war. They're not seeing what the rest of the world is seeing, and they're like really confused. I mean, I went up to Columbia University a couple days ago on Friday, and I was kind of like really looking for like anti-Semitic signs or any signs of any kind of tension, and there's nothing to be found. In fact, there's like rules at the entrance of the encampment that say we will not antagonize or engage at all with pro-Zionist or pro-Israeli protesters. We will remain calm and civil and polite to everybody, no matter what they say to us. I didn't see any anti-Semitic anything. But nevertheless, this was the most boring protest I've ever been to. Nothing's happening. It's not even a protest. It's a sleep-in. People are just hanging out in tents on a gorgeous day, right? And like, I'm like, you guys, the worst part about this protest is that it's boring. There's as much press as there are protesters, and everybody's got their cameras all set up, waiting for something to happen. Nothing happens. And there was this apparently Jewish woman, like I'd say she was probably about 20, and she was absolutely convulsed in tears, sobbing in the arms of a rabbi. And she was like, how can they be this way? How can they think this? And he's like, you just have to accept it, dear. And I'm like, it was like a psychosis to me. I'm like, what is up with her? What is she afraid of? There's literally nothing here. You have worked yourself into a frenzy through a bunch of logical leaps, right? Like if you're against the war, you're pro-Palestinian. If you're pro-Palestinian, you're pro-Hamas. If you're pro-Hamas, you're for the destruction of the state of Israel. If you're for the destruction of the state of Israel, you want all Jews to be killed in Israel. If you want all Jews to be killed in Israel, you want all Jews killed everywhere. Anyone who sympathizes with that is an anti-Semite and would murder you personally as a Jew. These are a lot of logical leaps that you have to go through to get to that state of crying that much. I was like, well, what is up?
You mentioned that she was young, so we'll leave that where that lies. But I think there is, when you say from the river to the sea, when you do say when you chant, and this is a fact that that we need to burn Tel Aviv to the ground. I think if you're Jewish, you see that as threatening. I think it's meant
I've never
to
heard
be
the Tel
threatening.
Aviv burning Tel Aviv to the ground.
I'll send you the video.
Please do.
But
Not in
even
Colombia.
now,
Not in
with
Colombia.
AI, Colombia, no, it was a street. I think it was a street protest. I think it was in New York. And that dovetails into another thing. A friend of mine who's a rabbi passed along, this posting to X, formerly Twitter, and about bringing American flags to protests in the streets of New York. I forwarded it to Ted
Mhm.
and to see what his thoughts were. And Ted called bullshit. And that's where we are right now. I'm not going to the veracity of the story. And Ted was right in the sense of you see these sort of hyperbole, this stuff that just confirms the very worst of your opposition. And it turns out not to be true. Now, these images that they posted of people burning the flags and they were wearing, looked to be the Palestinian scarf, which
The keffiyeh.
is that what it's called? Thank you. It was that from a protest from some other time? Was it? Could it have been? There's a whole lot, and so when you call bullshit, you can do that. And we're going back to what we were talking about earlier with the with the mass graves at the hospital in Gaza. Is how much of that is true, and how much of it can you just say, well, I call bullshit? And the fact that we can't trust any news source
Yeah.
at all.
No.
And in fact, Ted had used for years, what are you going to believe? Your me or your lying eyes?
That
Well, now
test
with
no
AI,
longer works.
it doesn't, because AI,
Deep
they're more,
fakes.
and
There's a
it's being made.
teacher, I forget what state, somewhere in the middle of the country, where he was arrested. He was a teacher at a public school. This happened last week. He was pissed off at at the principal of his school. And so I'm going to find this story. Here we go. Okay, so what happened? This is great. It's in Maryland. Okay, so Darzan Darien, a PE teacher and the director of athletics at a high school in Maryland, was accused of falsifying the voice of Principal Eric Eiswert in order to forge an audio clip that made Mr. Eiswert sound like he was frustrated with Black students and their test taking abilities. In the clip, which circulated widely on social media, the voice of what appears to be Mr. Eiswert can be heard saying that Black students are unable to test their way out of a paper bag. It also expressed discontentment for Jews who should never have been hired. It turns out this was an AI deep fake. The guy never said any of that shit. For all we know, probably doesn't think any of that shit. He's been completely libeled and smeared. The teacher has been arrested.
Good. I mean,
oh, yeah, good.
I was kind of stumbling around the internet the other day, and they were offering. Someone was saying, "Here's a software. You only need to have 10 words spoken by this person," and they demonstrated it. And it's something you've never heard of.
I assume you need thousands.
10.
Imagine us. Just this one podcast alone would be enough.
Oh yeah, no. If someone wanted to say, Scott Stantis saying he hates puppies and eats them on Sunday morning.
Or like that deep fake that you made of me, like not being into rescue animals earlier in the podcast.
Exactly. That's a demonstration, folks. Gotcha. So when you call bullshit on stories, you can, and a lot of times, frankly, it's not, it's true. So we'll wait for all these stories to play out, and we will comment on them as they do. Actually, the mass grave story, I think you and I should probably touch on that for the next few podcasts and just follow up on that story. And
we'll
see where it leads to.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say this one, I'm pretty good at my smell test. Sometimes there is a story where I'm like, I'm really sure that's true, and it turns out not to be. But usually I have a pretty good sense. Like I remember, for example, after 9/11, do you remember the photo that went around that seemed to be like it was like a guy on the roof of the World Trade Center,
yeah.
And the plane is in the background. And it's like, this photo was found in undeveloped film in the rubble at ground zero. Isn't that amazing? And like a friend of mine called me and said, "Oh my God, isn't that amazing?" I said, "Yeah, it's so amazing that it's not true." And so I like scanned the picture from the internet into Photoshop and blew it up really big. And you can see from the way that the pixels were not integrated like neatly along the border of the plane, that the plane had been like cut and pasted in a picture behind a guy on the roof of the World Trade Center.
Yeah, no, that was, but it looked awfully real.
It looked excellent. I mean, I'm just going to say that this story does feel real to me, because the IDF has been, there's documented evidence of some really serious atrocities, forcing journalists and other detainees to strip naked in the streets of Gaza, subjecting them to the cold, depriving them of food and water for days, numerous beatings. I mean, clearly there's lots and lots and lots of X/Twitter footage of IDF soldiers looting, killing stray dogs, just for fun, basically blowing up houses just for fun. I mean, it's like, look, I'm not going to say this is specific to the IDF. Soldiers in war are assholes. They're bastards. They're young, they're testosterone-y. They've been told that God is on their side. They've been able to subjugate the local population, and they can do whatever the fuck they want. It's the Stanford prison experiment on acid. This is true about soldiers in any field of battle in history. I mean, so it's not unique, but I got to say, this rings true to me. It's unusual when troops are really well disciplined and don't do this. That was one of the things that like Mao, really like during the Chinese Civil War with the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek's forces were rowdy. They'd come in and like steal all your shit and like rape your daughter. And the communists were really disciplined and well organized. And to the point where like sometimes they'd be like, we have to requisition your animals because we're hungry. And then literally, even after the army moved on and that territory fell back into nationalist control, the communists would send an agent, a runner, in to compensate the farmer in cash afterwards. And that was like massive hearts and minds, and a big part of the reason the communists won that war.
And then Mao went along and, with his stupid policies, starved 10 million people to death.
Because once he's in charge, he can do whatever the fuck he wants, right? So, yeah.
So on that note, let's put a bow on this segment.
All right, let's do it.
And we'll keep an eye on that story for you folks. So
all right. Yeah.
Stick around.
And I do hope it's false, but
yeah, me too.
We'll see. All right, keep it right here. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome back to the DMZ America podcast for April 28th. I'm Ted Rall, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the left.
And I'm editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right.
So last week, Scott, and I knew I was really looking forward to talking to you about this because this is a very Stantisian topic. And so what's happened is that Jack Smith, the special prosecutor in the January 6th case against Donald Trump, did an unusual thing, anticipating a possible challenge to his case and wanting that challenge to go as quickly as possible. Rather than waiting for Donald Trump to appeal to the US Supreme Court about the question of presidential immunity, filed himself a motion to the Supreme Court asking them to consider the question of Trump's possible ultimate defense, namely that as president of the United States, he enjoys and enjoyed absolute immunity for any act committed as president of the United States, with the caveat that some acts are private and some acts are, even though you are the president of the United States, and some acts are in the conduct of your position as president. And the question is, A, which of those acts are which, and B, are the acts that are that you perform as president covered under any form of immunity? And is that immunity absolute, or is it partial, or is it some kind of hybrid? Does it depend on what the act is? This goes to the absolute foundation of the American Republic and the separation of powers and the separation of what makes a president of the United States different from an English king. A lot of people don't know that even today, the King of England, even though he's not just basically a figurehead, still enjoys complete immunity under English law against all crimes. King Charles III can do anything he wants. He can murder, rape, double park, do whatever the fuck he wants, and no one can ever prosecute him. He will never be dragged in front of the Big Bailey. That is, I think we learned, Scott, in civics class as we were kids, that one of the defining aspects of the American system is that no man or woman is above the law, and that we're all treated equally, and that if the president of the United States, for example, like in a James Patterson thriller, decides to kill someone, that he will be dragged into the docket just the same as you and me. Of course, if that was really true, it brings up all sorts of interesting questions, like, for example, could George W. Bush or Barack Obama be tried for kidnapping because of the extraordinary rendition program, which was effectively kidnapping? Or could they be tried for murder or for the extrajudicial assassinations carried out under the drone program, which, obviously there was no legal basis for whatsoever. So, like, can a president, so should those kinds of acts be held accountable? And the thing is, basically the conservatives on the court, ironically, worried aloud in oral arguments last week as to whether or not the president might be frozen, might be incapacitated, and feel reluctant to act necessarily because,
which is fine with me, by the way.
Yes, that would be fine with me too, because most of the acts that a president would want to commit that break the law probably should not be kind of carried out. And liberals, ironically, also worried that that impunity that would be afforded by either partial or complete immunity would allow a president to run wild and behave in a lawless way. I don't know. I mean, it seems like according to all the reports of the arguments, and I heard part of them, it seems to be the court is divided, and conventional wisdom is that they're going to come out with some sort of partial immunity for some acts of president. This has never been settled, right? Like Nixon wanted executive privilege. Right. Bush believed in the theory of the unitary executive. But here we are, 50 years in.
Almost 250.
And we're in just 2 years. By the way, parenthetically, the 250th anniversary of the United States is a big effing deal, right? It's the sesquicentennial, right? How come there's no talk at all about, like, 2026 is going to be a big fucking deal, like lots of patriotic bullshit? How come we're not even talking about it?
Well, first off, that presumes that Americans actually know enough history to know what the hell we're talking about. I don't think that's. I was listening to NPR this morning. They had a test, and they have a quiz, and they have a guy come in, sound like a very smart fellow, but he said, "Okay, let me hoisted by your own
petard."
Thank you. That's a line from Shakespeare. Yes. Hoisted on your own petard means you blew yourself up.
Yes,
it can be. He didn't know it, and so I'm joking only a little bit about Americans not knowing history. So getting back to the sesquicentennial, I don't think most Americans go, well, what? First of all, it's a funny word that nobody ever uses.
It is.
But getting back to the Trump immunity and so on, there's a lot to unpack here, Ted. I mean, it's just like, if you recall, and who does, during the Richard Nixon, he was then former President Nixon, David Frost interviews, Nixon said, if the president does it, it's legal. Yep. And people were aghast. In fact, that whole movie, Nixon Frost, and the play, which was based on a play, oh my God, how can a president say such a thing? And in fact, it was a fairly legitimate school of thought by constitutional experts, not least of which is William Barr, who, can I go on a side tangent very briefly? William Barr, who said Donald Trump should never, ever be in the Oval Office again, just announced last week that he is going to vote for, stay with me, kids, Donald Trump.
Well, after serving as AG for William Barr, for Trump. And
right. And William Barr is of the school that the president, whatever the president does, is legal by definition.
What's that school? I mean, does that school, I mean, I know we had a revolution against British rule, but we kept English common law. And a lot of stuff that comes out of it that's in the Constitution does necessarily legally derive from our British forebears, right? I mean, there's like, for example, the declaration that the President of the United States is the Commander in Chief of the Armed Forces. That was meant probably to be ceremonial because the English king was also like considered the Commander in Chief of the British Armed Forces. That was largely ceremonial. I don't want to get into the whole separation of powers thing there, but the point is, what was the thinking? What is the logical thought? I mean, what doesn't it go to the core of what it means to have our system be differentiated from the English system, to say that anything a president does is legal by definition, and it's not in the Constitution.
Well,
if you're an originalist, it's just not in there.
Well, and if you're an originalist, you cannot believe for a moment that these guys who just threw off the yoke of British, royal tyranny would turn around and say, you know what we need? Royal tyranny is what we need. Equal justice under law. No person is above the law. These are things that were drilled into Ted and I, at least, in civics class. And for you kids out there, civics class is where they teach you about, civics and how the government works and what the Constitution stands for. I cannot understand conservative, and it does seem to come from the conservative camp, which is weird, would somehow embrace and codify and try to substantiate this in an intellectual way, how the president is above the law. Now, what we heard from oral arguments before the Supreme Court is some of the conservative justices, I mean, the real conservative ones, Alito and Clarence Thomas, were like, well, of course he is. Of course he can do any damn thing he wants to. Okay, let's put those guys into a box. And
yeah, but like, I mean, like, if I turned, as I often do in a situation like this, back to the Federalist Papers, to prayer, and to Clovis, and well, the prayer to Clovis.
Prayer to Clovis, yeah.
Yes, but Clovis is thinking on it, but. But I mean, I turned to the Federalist Papers, which I know are not 100% reliable. It's one man's, ad campaign. Well, three. Okay. But the point is that they were, but still, I mean, it's pretty reliable. And you get a pretty good, because if those were inaccurate, there would have been some people screaming like, no, that's not what we meant. And like, clearly separation of powers and co-equal branches of government was a foundational part of the structure of the Constitution. I mean, no one ever said that any branch was superior to any other. So this would effectively place the executive branch above the other two, right? I mean, specifically over the judiciary. Isn't that, I mean, I just don't see it. I don't think there's anything there, but yet it seems pretty clear that because of the 6-3 majority,
Well, the other conservative justices, what the point I was getting at is that they said, well, maybe there's a middle ground. I mean, Ted touched on this when he was teeing this up earlier in the segment. Maybe there's a middle ground that, there's public and private acts that are covered by this and not covered by this. Well, who defines that? I mean, who defines what's public and private?
That to go back to the Supreme Court every time.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's what they want. I mean, it certainly gives them enough power, but to say that I never understood presidential immunity to begin with. I never understood. You talked about you were in New York and you were on the show, and your co-host, Angie Wong, mentions that, Manhattan was shut down because President Biden was making an appearance there. I've always hated that. That's how much of an anti-royalist I am. Make them drive in fucking traffic.
I'm with you. I guess it's a security thing. Hey, nothing's ever happened to a president
you can make
while
the
he was
excuses
driving.
for it, but they're excuses. They're not necessities. Just drive through traffic. And if you want to get from, upper Manhattan to lower Manhattan, you're gonna have to deal with the traffic. That's, you're gonna have to do what I have to do,
Yeah,
Jagoff.
do what. Yeah, I mean, Michael Bloomberg, who is a billionaire, he takes the subway if he wants to get anywhere fast.
Uh, when Rahm Emanuel was mayor of Chicago, he would just plow through red lights with his entourage, his two or three car, SUV thing, like he was the fucking president. You're the mayor of Chicago. Take
Yeah,
the
it's like
goddamn
that's like
L.
yeah, they're behaving like it's sort of like in a former Soviet republic, like in Turkmenistan, where the dictator literally they do this. Like they'll announce it like, oh, the western part of the city is closed today to all traffic because the president of the republic will be traveling through the streets, so they close off everything. And
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I understand the security concern. Probably driving is the one place, right? Like Archduke Ferdinand, JFK,
Okay.
Garfield, right? In a car, I think, or
No, no, no. They didn't have cars then.
oh yeah, no, that's right.
Garfield was actually going to grab a train.
Okay, now, always involving in some kind of transit thing though. Um, but they're always like, I don't know. It seems like that's often a place that you try to assassinate people. Somoza, the dictator of Nicaragua, was killed in his car. But I don't know. It's just like I agree with you. But that's a side note. I mean, so what do you? I
Well,
mean,
no, no, it's not a side note because it plays into the attitude, the American attitude towards what the presidency is, and did it become, in the words of I believe was this White, the author of the Imperial Presidency,
Thomas, yeah, Theodore White. Mhm.
Theodore White, and I don't think any American worth their salt wants an imperial presidency,
But we've
and
gotten one. I mean, Scott,
I know you're
things like
right.
we did. I promised not to talk about war powers, but I guess I lied because I wrote. I mean, like I've done a deep dive in this because I reviewed a couple of books about this topic for the old San Diego Union Review book review, and basically going back to 1800. Presidents have started to seize, for example, the power to declare war and deploy troops away from Congress. That even though the Constitution specifies that power really rests exclusively with Congress, and now basically presidents just declare wars all the time. Um,
Yeah.
but they don't really declare them; they just make them happen. But we haven't really, just think about how crazy it is. Like we haven't declared a war since 1941 legally, and obviously we've had a lot of wars since 1941.
Right. And the idea that, and it started with W, it was really brought to the fore by Barack Obama, and that's executive orders.
Yeah,
That seems to me to be beyond. I mean, that
and
seems
signing
beyond.
statements where it's like
Yeah.
we're signing this bill, but we're not going to follow it. It's like
Well,
crossing. It's like a legal like crossed fingers behind your back.
there's that. Um, my, the, we have an imperial presidency. We have, and that, that if you're a student of history and a student of the
This will
presidency,
codify it.
well, this says the president can literally do, I mean, Trump's not wrong. He could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and walk away.
Up until now, well, and that was an argument based on his popularity. But this is more disturbing because you basically had like an ad hoc system that had basically strung up and left us with an imperial presidency just because nobody enforced it, but it seemed to be something we were all willing to accept. When the Supreme Court comes back next month or the month after that with their decision in this case, it is going to set in codified from the highest court in the land for the foreseeable future an agreement that this is okay, and it was never okay, but it will be okay.
Right. And
This
so you come
reflects a
back,
change in our system.
right. And you come down to, originalists. I come back to my point. To your marrow that these guys who wrote the Constitution, had the Constitutional Convention, had no intention of creating an imperial presidency.
Thing on their mind. The
Yeah.
last thing. No fucking way.
So, I mean, let's assume for the moment the Supreme Court comes out with the decision that yes, he has immunity, some immunity, qualified immunity. Could they? I mean, the other option for them is to send it back to the lower courts to define what that limited immunity would be. Is that correct? I mean,
That's
that's
correct. Yeah, that would go back to Judge Juan Merchant here in New York City, the federal circuit court.
and that means that the judge has to decide what is a public and what is a private action. And it's just like this. I mean, it gets absurd. No, it's a very simple take on this. The president does not have immunity. And when you say, well, that might, elicit the president or might force the president to act more timidly, I'm thinking, yes,
You're like, good.
that would
I'm
be
okay with
awesome.
that. Yeah.
Yes, I am more than okay with that, because having this kind of, imperial presidency as we have it currently, we stumble into more than two stupid wars or stupid actions. Ted, in the last 6 months, American soldiers who were stationed in Niger were killed by some offshoot of ISIS. And I'm going, my first thought when I heard that, well, my first thought was, I feel sorry for their families. But my second thought is, what the fuck are American soldiers doing in Niger?
Right.
Why in the hell are we even there? Bless you. Ted just sneezed. He turned off his, oh, you poor guy.
Yeah.
Wow, that was
allergies just killing me.
That's a big sneeze for such a little fella.
That's not even
anyway, that's, that. And so if it means that we don't send our young men and women to Niger for no discernible reason other than to be fodder for ISIS,
I'm with you.
Africa,
I'm totally with you.
I'm down with that. I am totally okay with that.
Yeah, I would have a very hard time imagining any scenario in which it would be bad for the country or the world for an American president to feel constrained in some way.
Let me close off this segment with this. I keep talking about Calvin Coolidge. There was a recent biography that was just tremendous. And Calvin Coolidge, every morning, he and the Secretary of Treasury would be going through the federal budget line by line. I mean, to the point where he says, wow, the Department of Interior is using way too many envelopes. I'm not kidding. And I've told this to many people, and you're the only person I've said this to, Ted, who did not come back with, well, I don't want my president doing that.
President doing that.
That is exactly what I want my president to be doing during his day.
Yeah. Maybe not every day, all day, but that should be
an hour and a half every morning. You have to go through the federal budget.
Yeah, I mean, you are spending billions of taxpayer dollars, trillions, and you should be a careful, arbiter and be careful. The word I'm looking for is trying to use husbandry, a caretaker of the people's money, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. And I think
and while you're doing that, you're not starting a war. So there's that too.
There it is. Okay.
Or fucking an intern. Anyway, all right. We'll leave that there, and then we'll come back for our final segment here on the DMZ America podcast.
Woohoo! Smoke them if you got them.
I remember that. So the Biden administration had been poised to enact a ban against menthol cigarettes and cigars. And I don't know if cigarillos is a thing. But anyway, that is a flavor that has long been popular among Black Americans, and so as the administration goes into what looks to be a very tight election against former President Donald Trump, where blacks are a key part of the voting coalition for the Democrats, the White House has decided to take its tack. And it has decided to not move forward with these new rules. They say that a menthol, according to the FDA, this would have saved, this ban, about 650,000 deaths overall over the next 40 years, of whom 238,000 are estimated would have been African Americans. But the White House has decided we need this is going to piss off Black voters. They're not going to be in menthol flavor country. So we would rather, what we want them to do before they die of cancer is vote for us. that's
the level of cynicism on this is so galling. And it's everything that you hate, that people hate about politics. And that is, this clearly is a health issue. Menthol cigarettes, I mean, regardless of who smokes them, and I did not know until this story that African Americans were the #1 market in the United States for menthol products, both cigarettes and cigars, which I love cigars, and a menthol cigar sounds absolutely wretched, but that's another story altogether.
But if you
Um,
were black, you would totally change
yeah,
your mind about that.
there it is. But
Maybe you could Rachel Dolezal that shit and pretend to be black.
I could. Yeah, look at me. If any of you
Trans
watching
black.
the actual video,
Hey,
that
hey, you
happens.
did 23andMe. Do you have any secret surprises?
I don't. But you want to hear a weird story, and we'll get back to the point. They had a skin cancer screening uh, thing where I worked at the Birmingham News, and it checked your melanin level and see where it was. And the
And they
woman
said,
takes the
came back
picture
and they said Scott Stantis is the whitest man on planet Earth.
on the contraire, au contraire,
Au
mon
contraire,
frère.
mon poisson.
Mon petit fripon. No, it was they found the person looks at the picture, looks at me, and if you're like I said, if you're watching the video, I'm pretty damn Caucasian looking, although I'm
Agreed.
swarthy. I'm swarthy. She looks at the picture, looks at me, looks at the picture, looks at me, and says, "Are you African?" And I was
What?
like, "Not that I'm aware of." And she showed
Well,
me the
Afrikaners are
melanin showed
African.
up as like we're darkened, obviously. And so the photograph, and so I looked at the photograph, and holy crap, I'm a dark man. But apparently, according to the ancestry DNA test, I have no African blood, which shocked the hell out of me. I just assumed because I have a lot of Spanish blood up here in,
That's
Iberian
true.
Peninsula, all that stuff. I just assumed. But yeah, apparently, so you make fun, but
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, anything's
anyway,
possible. I'm not personally
going back.
getting a 23andMe test for the simple reason that I know that those results end up in government databases, and I hate that.
Yeah, I've given up that fight. I can't, like TikTok, I think is one of the dumbest stories ever. They're mining your information. They have your information.
True, true.
It's done. It's
It's
over.
mined.
They got it. You're mine. Consider
It's
yourself
strip mined.
mined.
Yeah,
Yes. It's
there's nothing
um
left.
so when it comes, but getting to my original point, I meandered off here. I'm back. The sheer cynicism of this decision by this White House. They would rather have people, literally, Ted, they would rather have people die than risk not getting their vote. And so whenever you see, gee shucks, Joe Biden, do that, he cares about people. He does not care about people. He cares about power. He cares about getting reelected. And the Democrats care about getting elected. Period. And I understand I'm trying not to be naive and be shocked by politics, right? I mean, politics is a pretty base practice. And
True.
so, but
This is
is
low.
just
It's
this is
low.
so fucking low. It's like you could ban, I'm not sure, first and foremost, I'm not sure they have the authority to ban a product. I have problems with that, but
Of
that's a
course, you
liberty.
can ban a product. I mean, lots of products are banned. I mean, if cars that don't
Okay,
have a bunch of regulatory requirements in them, you can't sell a car without a catalytic converter in it. You can't sell, rocket propelled grenade launchers on the open market. Zillions of
mm,
products are banned. I mean,
right. And
heroin is banned. It's a
well,
product.
that's right. And we could debate that. That's another debate for another time. And you're absolutely right. This seems to me to be something that, if I want to suck on something that kills me, that should be my right.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that should be. I was like, what should that be?
I'm going to leave it right there.
I was like,
As soon as it came out
where's
of my
Scott
mouth,
going?
as soon as I heard it, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I
Pull
heard it
back,
and
pull
went,
back,
yes,
come back, come
abort,
back, come
abort.
back.
No, but in all seriousness, I mean, if you want to smoke, I think you have a right to. I think you're an idiot. And I, frankly, full disclosure here, Ted knows this. I smoked for a while. And it's extremely bad for you. It's unhealthy. And I'm glad I quit and haven't looked back. But by turns, I had a right I mean, you can tax the shit out of it, which they do. You know how much a
You
pack of
did have a
cigarettes?
right. You did have a right to smoke cigarettes, but I mean, in the same way that cocaine was legal, what, until the 1920s or something?
Yeah, well, see
Um,
that. Look, we were
things
getting
things
so much
change.
done. Nobody cared about child labor. Cocaine
True.
in our products is what made America better in the 20th century. That's what led to
Did it
Manifest
faster
Destiny.
anyway.
That's
Um,
what led to Manifest Destiny. That's why we kept going and conquering all these other places because we were just so high on cocaine.
could be, could be. We were spazzing out. I mean, I think that
Sorry.
there's like so. I mean, look, the thing is, it's obviously it's been 75 years since the Surgeon General's report. We all know that smoking is bad. Tobacco is a product that, when used legally, kills its users.
Yes.
So obviously, all tobacco products ought to be banned. And
Well,
there
except for cigars.
and the thing is, the menthol, right? The menthol product. I guess this is kind of part and parcel with like the various flavored vape pens that
Right. Or Joe Camel.
that have been that were directed specifically toward kids. Why Joe Camel appealed to kids, I've never understood. Camels are gross. They're not cute, but anyway, and especially
No,
when
they
you've been
spit.
around,
Yeah, you're right.
they're
Plus, he looked like a
putty and
penis.
mean and they're gross as shit. But anyway, they're smelly and they drool. But anyway, yeah. Anyway, I do think it's inconsistent, and it is really callous, and it's basically telling the black community, we only care about your votes, we don't care about your health. That's bad.
Does that surprise anybody?
Well, I mean, I think even for you and I, it surprised us. We're a little bit like, whoa, now that's some, like as you said, Scott, it's breathtakingly cynical. And this is our game. We know this game.
Yeah.
This is like, holy shit.
Yeah.
We'll see if anything comes of it or not. The final decision has yet to come down, but it looks like the Biden White House is going to kick this can down the road into past election day. And then after that, they don't give a shit. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. No.
All right. So I think that wraps it up here for the pod for this
Okay.
Sunday, April 28th. Scott, where can everyone find your stuff?
You can go to gocomics.com/Scott Stantis. That you can see my editorial cartoons. You can also go to gocomics.com/Prickly City and see my comic strip. Whether or not they've actually got the gallery up and running yet at the Chicago Tribune, you can do that and just go look. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Who the hell knows? You can go to the Dallas Morning News at dallasnews.com and see the work I do for them. And you can go to Centerclip, which is this wonderful app. Ted and I are both involved in it, and they're essentially mini podcasts, 30 seconds, no longer than 5 minutes. And there are quick audio takes on any given issue. And when something breaks, we're on it. And Ted actually has done yeoman's work on commenting, for instance, on breaking news several times, but more recently on the protests at Columbia. So Ted, I loved listening to your post there. And so Ted, where can we see all things Rawlian?
Well, you can go to gocomics.com/Ted Rall, the aforementioned center clip. You can go to the DMZ. You can go to the Final Countdown radio show with me and Angie Wong, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern. Also, go to X Spaces or Rumble, on which you can stream those after the fact. And of course, my website, rawl.com and whowhatwhy.org. Scott, as always, a pleasure. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to us here. Check back with us regularly. We are, as promised, we'll follow up that story about the alleged, well, it's not an alleged, it is a mass grave, but alleged Israeli war crime, having possibly been committed in the Gaza Strip. Keep it right here, and we'll talk to you next time.
Adios, muchachos
Au
and
revoir,
muchachas.
mes croissants.